Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Let's start today by asking you to just visualize a calendar. Picture the year 2026.
Okay.
Now, take a red marker and circle the week of late January through the first week of February, because looking at the absolute mountain of reports, intelligence assessments, and market data we have on the table today, I get the distinct feeling that historians are going to be coming back to this specific week for a long, long time.
It definitely feels that way. It really does. We are living through one of those moments where the history books are being written in real time and, the ink is still wet. It's messy.
Messy is putting it mildly. I mean, we've got a stack of sources here covering everything from a government shutdown in the U.S. to a full-blown military intervention in South America, plus a potential revolution in the Middle East. It feels like the world is undergoing a massive high-intensity stress test.
Stress test is the perfect analogy. It really is. For years, analysts have been talking about the creaking of the post-Cold War order. Well, this week, it feels like it stopped creaking and started fracturing. We are seeing a systemic shift across multiple theaters simultaneously. The term that keeps popping up in the strategic assessments, the one everyone's using, is polycrisis.
A polycrisis. It sounds like something a consultant made up to charge more by the hour.
Yeah.
But you know what? In this case, it actually fits.
It does. It really does. Because we aren't just looking at isolated events. We are looking at three specific vectors of instability hitting all at once. First, we have the Americas, specifically the fallout from the U.S. intervention in Venezuela.
Okay.
Second, the Middle East, where the Iranian regime is looking like it's teetering on the edge of a structural collapse.
Full-on collapse.
And third, the tech sector. This is a quieter one, but maybe the most important. The Silicon Curtain between the U.S. and China is cementing into a permanent divide.
And running through all of these, and this is the thread I want us to really pull on today, is this shift in how nations are operating. It really feels like we're moving away from ideological idealism and crashing hard into transactional realism.
That is the core thesis of this week's assessment. That is the whole story. The era where we, did things because they were democratically right or morally just, that seems to be receding.
It's over.
We are entering a world of cold, calculated transactions. It's about resources, it's about stability, and it is completely unsentimental.
And the irony, of course, is that while the world is fracturing geopolitically, the scientific world is still trying to save us. I mean, we have a medical imaging breakthrough in the stack today that honestly sounds like something out of science fiction.
Yeah, that story is incredible.
Plus some news from Mars, which is always cool.
That's the paradox of our time, isn't it? Politics builds walls, science tries to hurdle them.
So let's get into the thick of it. We have to start in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah.
Segment 1, Venezuela. The report calls this section Oil for Legitimacy, which, that already sounds cynical.
It is cynical, but it's also reality. To set the scene, we have to look back just a little to January 3rd, 2026. Operation Absolute Resolve.
The U.S. unilateral military intervention. Now, let's be really clear for you listening. This wasn't an invasion in the style of Iraq 2003 with hundreds of thousands of troops, but it was kinetic.
Oh, very kinetic. It was effectively a targeted decapitation strike, but one framed as law enforcement. The U.S. went in executing a 2020 narco-terrorism indictment against Nicolas Maduro.
I want to pause on that indictment because I think people forget the details. This goes way back. This was when Bill Barr was Attorney General, right?
Exactly. This wasn't just, we don't like your politics. The indictment from the Southern District of New York charged Maduro and his whole inner circle as being the leaders of the Cartel of the Suns.
The Cartel of the Suns.
Yes. They were accused of turning the Venezuelan state apparatus, the military, the judiciary, everything, into a massive drug trafficking organization with the goal of flooding the U.S. with cocaine.
So that gave the U.S. the legal hook for this year's operation. It wasn't framed as regime change in the classic sense.
Not at all. It was framed as international law enforcement, like going after a mob boss, but the mob boss happens to run a country.
Okay, so the operation happens. It's swift. Maduro is captured. He's extradited. He's in a federal facility in Miami. The bad guy is in handcuffs. If you're just reading the headlines, you're thinking, great, the dictator is gone, democracy is back, mission accomplished.
And that is the trap. That is exactly the trap. That is where the idealism runs headfirst into the brick wall of resource realism.
Because
if you look at what has happened in the months since the operation, the strategy hasn't been about restoring the ballot box at all. It's been about securing the oil fields.
This is the part of the research that really, really surprised me. We aren't seeing a new election being planned. We aren't seeing the opposition take power. We are seeing what the reports call a pivot to pragmatism
Yeah.
involving Delcy Rodríguez.
Right. Delcy Rodríguez. For anyone who doesn't follow this closely, she was Maduro's vice president. She has been a pillar of the Chavista regime for years.
A true believer.
Absolutely. Logically, if you are removing a narco regime, you wipe the slate clean. You don't keep the number two in charge.
But the U.S. has kept her in charge. Why? Why her? She's sanctioned. She's part of the old guard. Why would Washington trust her?
Because she's the ultimate pragmatist. That's what the intelligence profiles suggest. While Maduro was, he was ideologically rigid, obsessed with the socialist revolution narrative.
Right.
Rodríguez is transactional. She understands global finance. She was the one negotiating back-channel deals with China and Russia for years. She realized that without U.S. capital, Venezuela's oil infrastructure would literally rust into the ground.
So the U.S. isn't betting on her goodness.
No, not at all. They are betting on her greed and her instinct for survival. The Trump administration has effectively aligned with Rodríguez because she agreed to a very specific, very cold-blooded transaction, the Rodríguez-Trump Pact.
Okay, so break that down for us. What is the oil for legitimacy transaction? How does it actually work on the ground?
It's brutally straightforward. Rodríguez gets to stay in the Miraflores presidential palace. She gets to head the transitional government. The U.S. recognizes her as the legitimate, albeit interim, leader of Venezuela.
And in exchange,
she has rapidly implemented a raft of oil reforms that Washington and the big oil majors think Chevron, ConocoPhillips have been demanding for more than a decade.
And these reforms, what do?
They effectively give U.S. corporations priority access to Venezuela's hydrocarbon assets. It rolls back years of nationalization. It creates favorable tax structures. It guarantees contracts.
I saw the term reparations used in one of the analyses we're looking at. That feels like a really loaded word.
It is, but in a corporate sense, it fits. Think about all the assets Hugo Chavez expropriated and nationalized in the 2000s. Billions and billions of dollars of infrastructure, wells, refineries, just taken from foreign companies.
Right.
This new deal essentially allows those companies to lift oil, to take it out of the ground, as de facto compensation for those past losses. It's like a settlement, but paid in barrels of crude oil.
So the U.S. gets a stable supply of oil, energy markets calm down, and the corporations get their assets back.
And Rodríguez gets to keep her job and, presumably, her access to state funds.
It's basically a protection racket on a geopolitical scale. Give us the oil, and we won't come back and finish the job.
That is a harsh way to put it, but it's not inaccurate. It suggests that the U.S. views the Venezuelan subsoil, the oil, the gas, the gold, the rare earths, as the strategic priority. The political layer on top, the democracy part, that's negotiable.
But this leaves a massive group of people out in the cold. I'm talking about the Democratic opposition. People like Maria Corina Machado or Edmundo Gonzalez. I mean, these people have risked their lives fighting for democracy for 20 years. Where are they in all this?
They are the collateral damage of realism. That's the hard truth. Maria Corina Machado, let's remember, is a Nobel Peace Prize laureate. She has the moral authority. She has the popular support. She even met with President Trump at Mar-a-Lago in mid-January.
And what came of that meeting?
A photo op. And some vague assurances, according to the readouts. But you have to look at the reality on the ground. She is being completely sidelined.
How so?
The entrenched bureaucracy, the deep state of the Chavista regime is still there. All those functionaries, the military commanders, they're still in their jobs. And now they have a deal with Washington, brokered by Rodríguez.
So they have no reason to listen to Machado?
None. She went on Face the Nation on February 1st and tried to put a brave face on it. She said the transition to democracy is unstoppable, but when the host pressed her on a timeline for elections, she had nothing concrete to offer.
And the sources we have are hinting at a very long delay.
A very long one. Private hints from U.S. officials are suggesting elections could be delayed for 18 to 24 months.
2 years.
For stability. That's the word they use. They want the oil flowing and the contracts signed before they risk the chaos of a Democratic campaign.
That is just devastating for the Democratic movement. 2 more years of waiting.
Guillermo Miguelena Palacios, he's from the Venezuelan Progressive Institute, had a quote that just stuck with me. He said, Venezuela is witnessing an economic transition, but not a democratic transition.
That's the key distinction, isn't it?
It is. It's everything. And you have to think about the signal this sends to the rest of the region, to the rest of the world, really.
What do you mean?
Well, this week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio was on the phone with the president-elect of Costa Rica, trying to reassure them, trying to keep the periphery calm. But if I'm an autocrat in, say, Nicaragua or Bolivia or anywhere else, what lesson am I learning from Venezuela?
You're learning that you don't have to be a Jeffersonian Democrat to survive a U.S. intervention.
Not at all.
You just need something the U.S. wants.
Sure.
Oil, lithium, a strategic port.
Exactly. You learn that ideology doesn't matter. If you are willing to sell your resources and cut a deal, you can survive. It's a new doctrine. It's transactional interventionism.
Okay, so that is the Americas. Stability bought with oil. Very cynical kind of stability. Now, I want to pivot to the Middle East because the reports suggest the exact opposite is happening there. We aren't looking at stabilization. We are looking at a rupture.
A total rupture, yeah. We are looking at Iran. And the term the intelligence community is coalescing around is a proto-revolution.
A proto-revolution. Now, we hear about protests in Iran every few years. 2009, the Green Movement. 2019, the fuel price protests, the Masa Amini protests in 2022. How is this different? Is it just bigger crowds?
It's not just about size, it's about structure, it's about depth. The previous uprisings were hugely significant, but they were often centered on specific grievances or specific demographic students, women's rights advocates, urban intellectuals.
Right.
This is different because the state-society relationship has fundamentally broken across class lines. It's systemic now. And the trigger here wasn't just social policy, it was an economic catastrophe of epic proportions.
I'm talking about the currency collapse.
Yes, the Iranian rial. In late 2025, it hit 1.4 million to the US dollar.
1.4 million.
Just try to wrap your head around that. Forget saving money. How do you even buy bread? That kind of hyperinflation doesn't just hurt the poor, it obliterates the middle class overnight. It makes all commerce impossible.
And this is where the crucial insight from our source material comes in. This is the aha moment for me. It's about who turned against the regime this time.
The bazaar.
The Tehran Grand Bazaar. Now, for you listening who might think of a bazaar as just a flea market or a tourist spot, we need to correct that image. Why is the bazaar so politically potent in Iran?
You have to picture the Tehran Bazaar not just as a market, but as the country's economic nervous system. It's a city within a city, miles of covered corridors, thousands of merchants. Historically, the Bazaris are a deeply conservative socio-political network.
Conservative how?
They are religious, they are traditional, and they control the flow of goods, money, and credit in the traditional non-oil economy. They're the gatekeepers.
And historically, they were the regime's friends.
Yeah.
They were allies.
They were the regime's foundation. In 1979, the Bazaris provided the money and the logistical muscle for the revolution against the Shah. They allied with the clerics under Khomeini. They are the reason the mullahs could consolidate power so quickly.
So if the bazaar turns against you?
The regime loses its economic floor, and that is exactly what happened. Because of the currency collapse, the Bazaris can't price their goods from one hour to the next. They can't import, they can't extend credit, they can't do business.
So they just closed up shop.
They shut the gates. And when those ancient metal shutters go down in the Grand Bazaar, the silence is louder than a bomb. It sends a signal to every household in Tehran that the money has stopped moving. The system is broken.
And the demands from the protesters have shifted too, right? They aren't just asking for subsidies or better exchange rates anymore.
No, not even close. The slogans have morphed from economic grievances into explicitly political, explicitly revolutionary demands. We are seeing widespread calls for the downfall of the supreme leader and the complete dismantling of the Islamic Republic.
It's revolutionary intent.
It is. And the really scary part for the regime and for the whole region is that they don't seem to have the institutional bandwidth to handle it. They're fragile.
Fragile because of the leadership vacuum.
It's what one report calls a slow-motion metastasis at the top. You have to remember, President Ibrahim Raisi died in that helicopter crash back in May of 2024. He was seen as a key successor to the supreme leader.
Right.
And now Supreme Leader Khamenei himself is, what, 86 years old?
86. And reportedly very frail.
He's receding from public view, so you have this power void at the very top. This is causing paralysis and, according to our sources, intense infighting between the clerical elite and the IRGC, this Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps.
So they're fighting each other for control of the future.
While the streets are literally burning, they can't form a unified front to crush the protests or to offer concessions because they're too busy jockeying for position.
The violence numbers in the report from HRNA are just horrific.
HRANA, that's the human rights activists' news agency in Iran. They estimate 6,000 people have been killed and over 10,000 detained since late December. The regime itself, in its own internal communications, is referring to this as an internal war.
An internal war. And internationally, what's the response?
Yeah.
I saw President Trump tweeting about being locked and loaded.
Classic rhetoric. But beyond the social media posturing, there is some real pressure building. The UK and the EU are slapping new targeted sanctions on IRGC and police leadership.
But does any of that actually help?
Well, it isolates them, but it also highlights the massive problem that no one has solved yet.
The day after problem.
Exactly. Who takes over? You have figures like Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah, calling for a transition from abroad. But there is no unified leadership council inside Iran. There is no government in waiting, ready to step in if the regime falls tomorrow.
And that is the absolute nightmare scenario.
Yeah.
A collapsing state with nuclear ambitions and no one at the wheel.
Precisely. So you have Venezuela, which is being stabilized by a cynical deal, and then you have Iran, which is imploding with no safety net in sight. Two sides of the same chaotic coin.
Which brings us to the third theater of this polycrisis, Eurasia, the war in Ukraine. We are, just a few weeks away from the 4th anniversary? February 24, 2026.
And looking at the notes, the situation is just grim. It's a strategic stalemate soaked in blood. We had a very rare, very candid admission from President Zelensky this week regarding the human toll.
55,000 Ukrainian soldiers killed. That's the number he gave.
That is the official number he gave in a public address. Realistically, the true number might be higher. But even 55,000 is a staggering, staggering loss for a country of that size.
It speaks to the demographic strain they must be under.
Absolutely. They are running out of people before they run out of bullets, and that's a hard reality to face.
But there were talks in Abu Dhabi this week. The headlines, at least some of them, made it sound like there was progress, a breakthrough even.
We have to be really careful with those headlines. The visible result was a prisoner exchange. 314 people total, so 157 from each side, which is fantastic news for those 314 families. A real human victory.
But in terms of ending the actual war?
It was a complete deadlock. Russia still demands territory and the demilitarization of Ukraine. Ukraine, for its part, still demands a return to its 1991 borders. The Venn diagram of their core demands has zero overlap. None.
So the peace talks are stalled. But the security talks, the talks about what happens after the fighting stops, seem to be moving. There's a new proposal on the table that's getting a lot of attention. It's called the three-layer security plan.
Yes, this is critical. This is the West's attempt to thread an almost impossible needle. How do you secure Ukraine for the long term without bringing them into NATO immediately, which Russia continues to say is an absolute red line?
So they've drafted this three-layered approach. Let's break them down. Layer one.
Layer one is self-defense. This is the porcupine strategy on steroids. The idea is to create a hyper-capable, technologically superior, Western-armed Ukrainian military that is so dangerous, so bristling with defenses, that Russia wouldn't dare touch it again.
Okay, so a massive investment in Ukraine's own military. That makes sense. Layer two.
This is where it gets really risky. Layer two is a coalition of the willing. This would be a group of key European nations. The reports mention the UK, France, Poland, maybe the Baltic states, deploying actual troops on the ground in Ukraine.
Wait, actual boots on the ground, Western soldiers in Ukraine?
Yes, but not as combatants on the front line. The idea is for them to act as a tripwire force. They would be stationed in rear areas, maybe along the Belarusian border, or guarding key infrastructure in cities like Lviv or Kyiv.
But let's play that out. If a Russian missile hits a barracks in Kharkiv and kills 50 French soldiers, isn't that World War III? Doesn't that trigger Article 5?
That is the ambiguity the plan relies on. Because it's a coalition of the willing and not an official NATO operation, Article 5 isn't technically automatic. It's an Article 4 situation, which calls for consultation.
But the psychological deterrent
Is massive. Putin knows that killing British or French troops in large numbers changes the political calculus in Paris and London instantly and irrevocably. It's a very high-stakes game of chicken played with live battalions.
Incredibly high stakes.
Yeah.
And then there is the final layer, layer three.
The U.S. military backstop. This is the ultimate guarantee. A binding commitment enshrined in a bilateral treaty that if the first two layers fail and Russia launches a new large-scale invasion, the United States intervenes militarily within 72 hours.
72 hours. That is a hard promise. That is faster than Congress can even convene to debate a declaration of war.
It's a massive promise. It's designed to be unambiguous, and naturally, Russia absolutely hates it. Foreign Minister Lavrov was out this week calling it an ultimatum and said that any foreign troops on Ukrainian soil would be considered legitimate targets.
So this is the framework being discussed. It really signals a shift from supporting Ukraine to actively containing Russia for the long term.
That's the new reality. It's a new Cold War architecture being built before our eyes.
It's a fascinating, if terrifying, roadmap. So we have these three huge geopolitical shifts happening. But there is another war happening, one that is quieter, involves no missiles, but might be even more consequential for the next century, the tech war.
The Silicon Curtain.
We've talked about trade wars before on this show. We've talked about tariffs, export controls, but this report describes something fundamentally different. It calls it the formal bifurcation of global computing standards.
We are way past the point of simple tariffs. This isn't about making goods more expensive. This is about creating two separate, incompatible digital universes. And the catalyst this week was a major directive from inside China.
The Chinese government ordering their own tech giants to stop buying American chips.
Yes. The Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, MIIT, and the Cyberspace Administration of China, the CEGI, jointly ordered their national champions, Alibaba, Tencent, ByteDance, Baidu, to pause or dramatically scale back orders for Nvidia's top-of-the-line H200 AI chips.
I want to play devil's advocate here for a second. Nvidia makes the best AI chips in the world, period. It's not even close. If you want to win the AI race, don't you need the best hardware? Why would China deliberately hamstring its own tech giants by banning the best tools?
That is the logical short-term view. We need the best performance now. But Beijing is taking the long-term strategic view. They call it silicon sovereignty. They are utterly terrified of U.S. kill switches.
Kill switches.
They're worried that if a conflict breaks out over Taiwan, the U.S. could remotely brick their entire data center infrastructure or cut off the supply chain instantly. Their entire digital economy would grind to a halt. For them, it's a matter of national security. They would rather be slower and safe than fast and vulnerable.
So they are forcing their companies to eat their vegetables. Well, you will use domestic chips whether you like it or not.
Precisely. They are forcing a pivot to the domestically produced Huawei Ascend 910C chip.
Okay, so how good is the Huawei chip? Can it compete?
It's workable. The latest benchmarks we've seen suggest it's about 60%, maybe 70% of the performance of the Nvidia H200, which is the previous generation. So it is slower. It is less power efficient. But, and this is the key point, it is theirs. It's made in China by a Chinese company with a Chinese software stack.
And by forcing the big Chinese tech companies to use it.
They are creating a massive captive market that will pump billions of dollars into Huawei's R&D, helping them close that performance gap over the next few years. It's industrial policy at a massive scale.
But the report mentions a Tower of Babel problem. Explain what that means.
This is the part that non-tech people often miss, and it's arguably more important than the hardware. It's about the software ecosystem. For the last 15 years, the entire world of AI has been built on NVIDIA's software platform called CDA. It's the English language of AI development. Every researcher, every university, every company, everyone speaks it. All the tools, all the libraries, they're built for CDA.
And now
Chinese developers are being forced to build on Huawei's proprietary architecture, which is called the Qianen stack.
So they are being forced to learn and use a completely new language.
Exactly. And that creates immense friction. It creates a brain drain effect. A Chinese AI researcher can't just go on GitHub, download some code from a paper published by a team at Stanford, and run it anymore. It won't work.
So the two ecosystems are drifting apart.
They're becoming mutually unintelligible. Future AI advancements might be non-interoperable. We are literally building two different internets, two different digital brains.
And the business impact of this for a company like Nvidia must be huge.
It's crushing. The data shows Nvidia's market share for these high-end chips in China went from 66% to just 8% in the last quarter. That is a collapse.
But the U.S. isn't just sitting back and watching this chip war unfold. The report says we're organizing the physical side of this too, the minerals.
The NATO for minerals, that's the term being thrown around. Secretary of State Rubio hosted this critical minerals ministerial in Washington. The goal is to build a secure supply chain for lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earths, all the things you need for batteries and advanced electronics that completely bypasses China.
And the new trade deal with India fits into this strategy too.
Perfectly. The U.S. just cut a whole raft of tariffs on Indian goods. It's not about charity, it's about grand strategy. The U.S. and India are aligning to create a powerful economic and supply chain axis that can act as a counterweight to China in the global south.
So it's a world that is splitting apart both digitally and physically. We have the U.S. organizing global trade, guaranteeing Ukraine's security, managing a transition in Venezuela. But let's bring it all home, literally.
Yeah.
Because for a superpower that is doing all of that abroad, things look incredibly messy here in Washington.
Flying blind is the phrase the report uses, and it is scary accurate.
We have a government shutdown again.
A partial shutdown, but the trigger this time is really interesting. It wasn't just a boring budget dispute about spending levels. It started with a lethal incident in Minneapolis involving federal agents.
Right. 2 U.S. citizens were killed during a DHS operation.
And that completely shifted the political debate. It went from being about border security funding to federal police accountability. The Democrats in Congress refused to fund the Department of Homeland Security without significant reforms. The Republicans refused to pass the reforms. Total stalemate. Shutdown.
Now, usually a shutdown means national parks close and passport processing slows down. Annoying, but not catastrophic. But this time, it's hitting the data, the core economic data.
This is the data blackout. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the BLS, has suspended all operations. Furloughed.
This just blew my mind when I read it. The January 2026 jobs report was supposed to come out this Friday. This is arguably the most important piece of economic data the world gets each month.
Yeah.
And nothing.
Indefinitely postponed. Just gone.
So let's play this out. Jerome Powell and the Federal Reserve are trying to decide whether to cut interest rates or raise them to fight inflation. Usually, they have a binder full of precise data unemployment numbers, wage growth, payrolls. What do they have now?
They have anecdotes. They have private sector data, like from ADP, which is notoriously noisy and unreliable. They are effectively flying blind.
And this is happening right as the labor market is showing signs of cooling, right?
Exactly. We saw significant layoffs at UPS and Amazon this month. If the economy is tipping into a recession, the Fed needs that precise BLS data to know exactly when to pivot and start cutting rates.
It's like trying to land a 747 in heavy fog, and suddenly your entire instrument panel goes black.
That's a perfect analogy. You think the runway is there, but if you guess wrong, if you keep rates too high for just 1 month too long, you could crash the entire economy. It's a massive, unforced error.
It is terrifying. And while the economic data is dark, the surveillance state seems to be lighting up. We need to talk about the civil liberties aspect of this week's news.
Yeah, this is a grim section.
The visa ban, for a start.
The administration suspended all visa processing for 75 countries based on claims of high welfare use by their nationals. But the Medicaid story is the one that really keeps me up at night.
Deportation officials are getting access to Medicaid data.
Yes. Immigration and customs enforcement officials are using health records to identify and locate undocumented immigrants. Hospitals are now having to issue warnings to their own patients. Think about the public health implication of that.
It's catastrophic. If I'm sick, if I have a communicable disease like tuberculosis or measles, I'm not going to go to the ER because I'm afraid of being arrested and deported.
Exactly. You drive disease underground, it becomes a public health disaster just waiting to happen.
And then there was the assault on the press, the Don Lemon arrest.
This felt like a major escalation. Don Lemon was covering a protest in D.C. He wasn't throwing rocks, he wasn't looting, he was holding a microphone and a camera. But the Department of Justice indicted him.
On what grounds?
On the grounds that by amplifying the protest with his coverage, he was a participant in the civil disobedience.
That is a legal theory that effectively criminalizes journalism.
It creates a profoundly dangerous precedent. If covering a crime makes you an accomplice, then the free press, as guaranteed by the First Amendment, is essentially dead.
It really paints a picture of a tense, fractured domestic environment. No budget, no data, and rising social tension. Not to mention the release of 3 million new pages of the Epstein files, which is just keeping that whole scandal churning.
Yeah, it's a mess.
But as we promised at the top, we are not going to end on total doom and gloom. Because while the governments are shutting down, the labs are open.
Thank goodness for the scientists. They are the only ones getting things done this week, it seems.
Let's talk about RIAS-PAT.
This technology is incredible. It stands for rotational ultrasound and photoacoustic tomography.
That's a mouthful. Let's stick with US-PAT.
It's a new imaging technology out of Caltech and USC. We've had X-rays, we've had CT scans, we've had MRIs. This feels like the next leap. Imagine getting a 3D, full-color image of your anatomy in under 1 minute.
Okay, how is it different from an MRI, which also gives you 3D images?
Well, MRIs are loud, they're expensive, they take a long time, and you're stuck in a tube. CT scans use ionizing radiation. Our US-PAT uses a combination of harmless light and sound waves. It's safe, it's cheap, it's fast, and this is the key, it shows function.
What do you mean by function?
An MRI shows you what the tissue looks like. It shows the anatomy. Our US PAT shows you the blood flow and the oxygenation levels in that tissue in real time. It can see how your body is working, not just what it looks like.
So what does that mean for a patient? What's the application?
The most promising one is breast cancer detection. It can see the tiny new blood vessels that a tumor creates to feed itself, a process called angiogenesis. It can see that happening before the tumor is even big enough to feel or see on a traditional mammogram. It's a complete game changer for early detection.
That is the kind of news we need this week. And there's more from the medical world, right? Genetics.
Yeah, a couple of quick hits. Researchers finally mapped all the cancer drivers for the CTNNB1 gene, which is huge for developing targeted therapies. And another team figured out how pancreatic cancer reverts its own mutations to become resistant to chemotherapy. Understanding that is the first step to defeating it.
Incredible. And from inner space to outer space, we found something on Mars. Or the Perseverance rover did.
A beach. An ancient beach.
A beach on Mars. I just love that headline.
It sounds like a great vacation spot, but it's scientifically huge. Perseverance found geological evidence of an ancient high-energy beach in Jezero Crater. This confirms that a large body of water, like a lake, existed there for a very, very long time.
It wasn't just a flash flood that came and went.
Exactly. It was a stable, watery environment, which means the window for potential life to arise on Mars was much wider than we previously thought.
Yeah.
Life needs time to evolve. This beach proves Mars gave it that time.
But as they say, space gives and space takes away.
We lost Avon.
The Mars orbiter.
Yeah, NASA officially confirmed they lost contact after the last solar conjunction. MAVEN has been our primary data relay, our internet router for Mars for years. It's a big loss for the interplanetary network, but, space is hard.
It is. And finally, one environment story that is a bit concerning. Invisible chemical rain.
TFA, trifluoroacetic acid.
This is the ultimate irony of environmentalism, isn't it?
Yeah.
We banned CFCs decades ago to save the ozone layer, which was a huge success. We replaced them with new chemicals, HFCs and HFOs. And now
those new, safer chemicals are breaking down in the atmosphere into TFA, which is raining down globally, everywhere from the Antarctic to our backyards. And it's a forever chemical. It doesn't break down in nature.
And we don't know the long-term effects.
We don't know the full long-term toxicity yet, but it's accumulating in the water, in the soil, in us. It's a stark reminder that every solution has a side effect.
That seems to be the theme of the entire deep dive today. Every solution has a side effect. The Venezuela intervention solved a narco indictment, but created a cynical oil pact. The tech war creates silicon sovereignty, but destroys interoperability.
It does. It all comes back to that.
And that brings us back to the synthesis. We are living in a world of transactional multipolarity. The United States can't pass a budget at home, but it's out there reorganizing global mineral trade. Iran is imploding from within, while China is methodically walling itself off from the world.
It leads to a final provocative thought, doesn't it, when you put it all together?
What's that?
We spent a lot of time talking about that 3-layer security plan for Ukraine. The bedrock of that whole plan, layer 3, is the U.S. military backstop, a solid guarantee to intervene within 72 hours. But then you look at the domestic segment we just discussed.
The shutdown, the data blackout, the paralysis.
Exactly. The shutdown, the polarization, the data blindness. If the U.S. government is so paralyzed by internal strife that it can't even publish a jobs report or keep its own lights on, how credible is a promise to go to war across the world in 72 hours?
That is the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? Can a paralyzed superpower still be the world's security guarantor?
Well, I think every capital from Moscow to Taipei, and certainly in Kyiv, is asking that exact question right now.
And on that note, we are going to wrap it up. We've given you a lot to chew on this week.
Indeed.
Please check the show notes. We have the diagrams for the RUS PAT imaging. Seriously, you have to look at them. They are amazing. And we've included a table that breaks down the 3-layer security plan. It's really worth your time.
Definitely.
Thanks for listening. Stay curious and stay informed.
See you next time.